According to a 2021 Psychological Association survey and the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, nearly 3 in 5 employees, 59%, said that they had experienced the negative impacts of workplace-related stress in the past month. Meanwhile, 87%, or a vast majority of employees, say that they believe that proactive action taken by their employer could have positive effects on their mental health. After a 20-year leadership career in the field of healthcare, mostly in chief financial officer or senior operations executive roles, Adam Nemer launched Simply Mental Health Leadership Consulting. Its purpose is to help leaders create stigma-free workplace well-being cultures as it relates to mental health. They do this by putting mental health literacy in the toolboxes of leaders right next to marketing, finance, and all the other tools necessary throughout a career in order to deem it a success. Nemer also has his own inspiring battle with his own mental health journey, which he was eager to openly share with me this week when we sat down to talk about his new venture, his career in healthcare, and how we can highlight mental health as a key concern and develop solutions with leaders to ensure a stigma-free workplace for everyone. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Absolutely. So, Adam, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, my friend. And I'm super excited to learn how you help companies work through their mental health concerns in the workplace. Great to see you this morning, and thank you so very much for being here.
Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be here. I really appreciate you spending some time with me.
Absolutely. Now, Adam, as you know, you've spent nearly 2 decades as a healthcare executive, and you have your own specific journey when it comes to your mental health journey. So before we dive into the meat and potatoes of our conversation, I'm just wondering if you can share some of your own personal journey with mental health and why it's so important to you to do the current work that you're doing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, Kevin. So I was a healthcare executive at the largest nonprofit integrated healthcare company in America for 20 years. And the first 15 years, I had undiagnosed depression, anxiety, and panic. When I was younger in life, when I was 29, I had found my dad's suicide, and I didn't get enough help that I needed. I went and got an MBA, I went and got married, had this amazing executive career. And on the outside, it seemed like I had a charmed life. On the inside, I had a continual anxiety, panic, depression. And it wasn't until a senior executive, this loving colleague at work who had taken a mental health first aid class, approached me one day with some worries about me and encouraged me to get some help. And that started my recovery journey. So after 7 years, I've started a business called Simple Mental Health to inspire and teach leaders how to put mental health literacy in their leadership toolbox.
Yeah, absolutely. And Adam, considering your personal journey, I'm curious, how do you view the term perseverance and resilience? What does that mean to you?
Oh, Kevin, I love that. It is ironic that you asked me that question as I was talking with a colleague yesterday for a few hours about the word resilience and talking about how in the business world and in society at large, we talk a lot about the imperative for folks to build their resilience because there's stressors that are always come out there. And for years, I went to executive training programs and leadership training programs that would talk about how employees and leaders can build their resilience, right? And what I have found is really when we say resilience in that workplace, what we really mean is how do we encourage mental well-being? Because when you are not having mental well-being, it's hard to be resilient. It's hard to persevere. And so resiliency is a really neat word that we can use with leaders and the business community to say, we say resiliency, but did you know that that really just means mental health? And so it helps by having that conversation, and it helps start that process of eliminating the stigma. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And Adam, based on your experience in healthcare as a senior leader and executive, I'm curious to ask you how you view the current state of the current healthcare system as it relates to mental health, because it's something that I believe that continues to be underfunded, and it's something that we all should keep a close eye on and continue to advocate for. Would you agree with that?
there is no specialty in medicine, whether it's mental health or physical health, that's doesn't have a sense of underfunding because there's always people out there that need help.
Mm-hmm.
And on the one hand, I completely agree with you. I believe that there are structural issues in our healthcare system that makes it hard to match patients with therapists. So, for instance, there could be plenty of therapists in your community, but they don't take private insurance that you have, right? And so the industry and the trying to unscramble the eggs there, I don't know that it's possible, but I think there's a bigger opportunity. When we think about the healthcare system, think about health. So think about cardiovascular health, your heart health, right? Everybody has heart health. And some people, though, need to run every day so that they just keep their heart healthy. And some people need to have surgery tomorrow or they could be in a lot of problem, right? And so there's lots of different things you can do to promote your heart health that's not necessarily seeing a doctor or using the medical system. It's the exact same thing with mental health, right? So your resiliency, on one extreme is you need to continue doing yoga and exercise so you can build your resiliency. Other people on the other extreme may need to call the suicide hotline, right? And so there's lots of different activities somebody can do to manage their mental well-being that doesn't require always using a therapist. There's lots of self-care opportunities to teach people about. So the more that we can go out there in the world and teach people about self-care, about the importance of yoga, meditation, exercise, talking about your feelings with people. The more we can take care of those activities, then it decreases the demand on the healthcare system, because we're preventing people. Mental health, you could be fine, and then over time you just build up into, all of a sudden you now have you have depression or anxiety clinically. And so if we can get people early with all these self-care opportunities, then how the industry has addressed the challenges of patients finding therapists is less important. And we're really doing the great work of preventing people from getting that sick. That's how I think about it. Instead of trying to fight the system, let's show everyone how there's so many other ways for people to get help.
There are multiple ways to skin a cat, isn't there?
Yeah, and it's people need different things. I'll tell you a funny story, Kevin. I don't know, it's funny, but my own mental health journey. I started on antidepressants when I found out how sick I was. I took cognitive therapy. I went to a special trauma therapy program called EMDR, but I still couldn't take a deep breath. And the thing that changed my life, what changed my life was going to hot yoga. All right. So so I needed antidepressants, I needed therapy, but the thing that really propelled me into better health was taking better physical health of myself through hot yoga. So it's just an example of there's a continuum of mental health. And yes, a lot of people, we should all be seeing therapists whenever we can, but we also can do a lot better self-care and prevention so that we don't get into that zone.
I've shared with you previously that I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy at birth, and it's important for me to prioritize my health, because if I don't do that, then my health deteriorates faster than the average person. And I always think that it's important for people to prioritize the things that are important to them. So I'm wondering, Gustavo, how important it is to prioritize mental health and really checking in on our mental health as well. How important do you think that is?
I think it's job one for everybody. So when you experience depression and anxiety, it hurts as much as any physical illness, period. And it impacts your performance as much as any physical illness. Now, 20% of people every year experience a clinically diagnosable mental illness. So what we know as a fact is that every year, 20% of Americans experience something just as painful as any physical illness. And every year it's a different 20%. So what we know as a fact is that everybody in society over a 5-year process statistically is going to experience what a behavioral health clinician would diagnose as depression or anxiety or another mental health diagnosis. Now, if you knew that over the next 5 years, you were sure to, or you were highly likely to be diagnosed with a cardiovascular disease, would you spend a heck of a lot of time now prioritizing your health and making sure it's job number one? Heck yeah, more than anything. If we all knew we were at risk for heart disease in the next 5 years, we would all be living lives in a completely different manner. And that's exactly what's happening in the world right now and in America right now with mental health. And so if you don't prioritize your self-care, if you don't prioritize your mental health, science has proven, and as much as I'm not a statistician, statisticians have basically proven that you are remarkably likelihood in 5 years to be diagnosed or to experience what a behavioral health clinician would diagnose as a mental illness. So in terms of prioritizing your health, we all are taking care of ourselves physically. But the one thing that we're all going to have a challenge with over the next 5 years, always, is our mental health. So getting the word out about that and the statistics and what it feels like, it's job number one. Self-care prevents mental illness, just like jogging helps prevent heart disease.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to take an active and proactive approach. Adam, let's dive into giving organizations sort of their mental health sort of toolbox, as you call it simply mental health. I know it's your mission to help equip organizations and leaders with, as you said before, mental health literacy in their leadership toolboxes, my friend, so that they can put it right beside things like marketing, finance, and sales. So let's dive into the mental health of the workplace and why it's important for leaders to invest in this medium.
So one of the, I guess, positive outcomes of the pandemic has been the broad awareness amongst business leaders that mental wellness is a leading driver of employee retention, recruiting, productivity, performance, team dynamic. And they know that their staff are hurting and they're aware of this. You know, the U.S. Surgeon General a few months ago identified workplace wellness as one of the top 5 population health risks in the United States. He declared toxic workplaces hurt your mental and your physical health. And so we know leaders now are aware that we have this huge problem and they don't know what to do. And so what we do is, and what they're doing is investing in a lot of wellness programs that are amazing and they're wonderful, better health benefits, more access to EAP programs. There's lots of lovely strategies that employers have been embracing for the last 5, 10, 15 years, but they haven't been successful. The prevalence of mental illness in the workplace continues to go up. And so what's going on here is, you know, Peter Drucker, the famous management guru from Claremont, California in the 60s and 70s, he coined the great phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. And we all know that to be true. So what's happening is our organizations are investing in wellness programs and these strategies, but the culture of the company, the leadership culture, the management culture is not a culture that supports mental well-being. So for instance, it might say, leave your emotions at the door. There's no place in the workplace for feelings. An example of something like that. And so what we teach at Simple Mental Health is we go upstream to change the culture of an organization. And the way you change the culture of an organization is you start by educating the leaders on why this is so important. And really, no matter what you do in life, your profession, you have this toolbox of skills, right? If you're a leader, you learn how to do sales, you learn how to do marketing, you learn how to have a courageous conversation, you learn how to talk to a board. You have all these tools that you pull out. You probably know CPR, so that if someone in your team is hurting, you can call 911 or give them the Heimlich maneuver if they're choking at lunch. What we do is we put mental health literacy in the toolbox of leaders. So mental health literacy is one, knowing that mental illness is a real thing to break the myths that drive the stigma and shame of the illness. 2, mental health literacy is knowing how to recognize if somebody might be struggling around you. And 3, knowing how to get them help. That's it. Because when a leader learns that their employees are hurting as much as 20% a year, as much as any physical illness, and then they know how to recognize which ones they are and how to help them, then they're able to help their employees who really need it, who are suffering in silence. But then it also redefines your leadership and management purview, because you start thinking, hey, this is my normal management technique. Given the fact that 20% of my teammates every year experience anxiety and depression, should I keep doing that? Or if I keep doing that, am I making people worse? So it's having that tool in your leadership toolbox changes how leaders behave. And that's what drives a culture change in the company, so that all those wellness programs can be successful. I'll give you an example. Wellness programs. A lot of companies do this wonderful program called EAP, an employee assistance program. And it's a program that you call if you're struggling, and they help you find what path you might need to get help. But there's a stigma of saying EAP. So the company and the leadership says, we've invested in EAP for you. But when they find out, they're not necessarily authentically vulnerable and sharing and acknowledging how much it's important to them as leaders, that if people are struggling, that they really take advantage of the EAP program. So it's reinforcing with their heart, with authentically from the heart, reinforcing how much they care for everyone and want them genuinely to call EAP if they're struggling, just as much as he wants or she wants them to call an oncologist if they're worried they might have cancer. And so that's what happens when you put mental health literacy in a leader's toolbox.
Yeah, and using that as a backdrop, Adam, I'm also curious to ask you about creating what you call psychologically safe organizations. What do you think the definition of creating a psychologically safe and thriving organization is, in your view?
Well, first, psychologically safe leadership is a term that was coined by a Harvard MBA professor, Amy Edmondson. And, and I encourage everyone listening today to read her books, follow her on social media. She's really the guru on this topic. Psychological safety, this is how I would describe psychological safety, is as a leader, you get to choose how people experience you. What sort of culture, what sort of environment are you going to be setting? Now, a leader's job is to create an environment where everyone can perform at their best every day, right? Now, what a psychological safe organization says is the culture of our company is supportive of mental well-being. And we practice management and leadership techniques that create a culture in our company where all of our employees and leaders feel safe, in their thoughts, to share their ideas, that to really show up every day as they are. And so psychological safety, another way of thinking about it is a handful of leadership and management tips and tricks and techniques that you use to be more inclusive of everybody in the room, right? And psychological safety allows everyone who might otherwise be afraid to participate, afraid or worried, anxiety, depression, right? They don't want to participate, they're afraid of it, or they're worried what might happen if they do. Psychological safe leadership practices help people who might be struggling with a mental illness participate just as much as everybody else. And it's really, it's so much easier to be a practitioner of a psychological safe management approach when you have upstream mental health literacy. Because when you understand that mental illness is real, when you understand how much it hurts, and you understand how it impacts people and how it impacts work, then all those tips of what you could do to be a more psychologically safe leader, they're just natural for you. Example, smile more. There's this, you walk around a company and there's this thing called executive presence. Everyone just looks like this. You could say, hey, we just had a great deal. Wonderful. We had a horrible thing. Wonderful. So just the masks that executives wear are a good example of when leaders take off their executive presence mask. That's a good example of what they can do to create a psychological safe organization.
Yeah, and Adam, one of my passions is really diversifying workforces and amplifying the need for individuals with disabilities and other abilities to really infuse themselves in the workforce. So with your experience in senior management roles, I'm curious, how do you think we can better diversify workforces to include individuals with disabilities?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I think what the movement that we have seen in corporate America for the last decade is a movement to diversity, equity, and inclusion in DEI programs. 90% of Fortune 500 companies in their organizations, either in HR reporting to the CEO, has a department whose accountability is to recruit talent from diverse backgrounds, different backgrounds, and to help them succeed and thrive in their business, and to help them grow and get promoted and get better jobs over time, right? Now, what I have seen is most DEI programs, they run something called a BRG, or a business resource group, like a group of employees from an African American background, or an LGBTQ plus background, or they're veterans, or they may have struggle with mental wellness. What I have not seen is prevalently, now that you've sparked my thinking with the question, is I haven't really seen business resource groups and enterprise resource groups focused on folks with disabilities, right? Like you said. And so it would be really interesting, I think, to engage that conversation with corporate DEI leaders and start educating them on the critical nature here, because it's really just their role is to find folks who better represent the communities where they're operating, right? To bring them into their company and help them grow. So that's off the cuff, that's what makes most sense to me, or those are the thoughts that comes to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And Adam, I wanted to dive back into workplace well-being, just because I think it's important for people to understand how critically important it is to really be vulnerable in terms of really admitting they need help with workplace wellness when they're struggling at work. So tell me about how you view the future of workplace wellness and the importance of being vulnerable at work when you really do need some assistance.
I'm just making a note. There's this thing called the isolation cycle of mental illness. The myths of mental illness drive the stigmas, which drive the shame, which drive the silence. So depression isn't a real illness. drives the stigma of people with depression are just weak, drives the feeling of shame. Oh my gosh, I have depression. I must be a weak person. So I stay silent. And it's this perpetual cycle of it's an insidious cycle that just keeps getting worse, right? And hold on one second. We all have our own stories, whether it's our personal story, a family friend, a brother, sister, mom, dad, but we don't feel safe enough. We don't feel safe in a setting to put ourselves out there in a vulnerable manner to share the story or share how we feel. Because if we do it, that's that end of that cycle. It's the myths that drive the shame, stigma, and the shame. So if you talk about it historically, or you share your story, there's a sense of shame and stigma because people don't understand. And so people don't rightly, because of the strength of the stigma in society, it's really hard for people to feel vulnerable, to share how they're feeling. That's why it is so damn important that leadership does. Leaders need to share their stories because the conversation of mental well-being at work really gets sparked when people start talking with each other. You know, as I shared my story with people at work when before I started Simple Mental Health, people start sharing their stories with me. And I am telling you, Kevin, everybody has themselves a close friend or a family member who's had a very significant mental well-being challenge. And part of getting better is talking about it, right? That's, talk about self-care earlier. Part of managing your health so you don't get into mental illness is being comfortable talking about it. So what I believe is most important are leaders of organizations themselves with true authenticity, sharing their experiences and their stories in a vulnerable manner. Because if the leader does that, then it opens up the door for everybody else to share their challenges. And, people will say, well, we don't want everybody walking around talking about their feelings. Well, we're not all therapists. Well, of course not. But we all don't walk around like we're oncologists worrying about cancer too. It's just another tool we can do at work to help people. And it's given the strength of the stigma in our society, it is so hard to be vulnerable and say, I'm really struggling. And, come to think of it now that I'm droning on, and then I'll stop in a second, is that's really what I want to do is, what I try to do is share my story with folk so that it sparks other people telling their stories. Because the more we share our stories, the healthier we are and the faster as a society we heal.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Adam, one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast was, I'm big on creating what I call social capital and community. It's really important to build sort of a support network of people that you can lean on when you have things like this. So I wanted to start this podcast to build bridges of unity and social capital. So tell me the importance of building those communities of social capital at work and how vitally important that is.
It is so unbelievably important. So this thought that when we come to work, we're not supposed to have feelings and emotions, it's irrational. It doesn't work. And all we are at work are just people that we view experiences through these paradigms of these emotions and feelings that we have. And having a community around you I once heard a rabbi tell me, Adam, loneliness is the scourge of humankind. There's nothing worse than when someone's lonely and feeling alone in the world. And you know what? I've thought about that a lot. And I, over the years, and I think he's kind of right in a way. And so loneliness and being alone is one of the worst feelings that can happen to somebody. And it's really dangerous for your mental well-being. So the opposite of being alone is your community. And so having a strong community at work, people that you like, trust, love, respect, who you also appreciate them as people and as friends. And you talk about social capital, you're there for them just as they're there for you, right? That having an environment at work and creating an environment where teammates feel comfortable building their own community and talking with each other. I think it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And Adam, I asked you earlier about creating a more diversity in the workplace for folks with disabilities, but I'm going to broaden the question and ask you, when you think of workplace diversity and its future, what do you think of when we really want to create a more diverse workplace where all opinions are valued? What do you think of when you think of the future of diversity at work?
I am so excited to see where it goes. The beauty of one of the neat things, I guess, of the history of humankind is that we're always making things better, right? We used to have an abacus, and now we have I guess I almost said calculator, but we all have phones, right? And so it's just progress. Now, I'll share an interesting story with you, Kevin. When my career started 20 years ago, um, I was taught and trained on diversity. Okay. And that was a common theme taught in corporate America. And how do you recruit talent from diverse backgrounds? And then about a third of the way into my career, about 7 years later, the conversation changed. And the conversation said, you know what, it's not about diversity, because if you bring people in and you don't give people from diverse backgrounds and equal opportunities as everybody else, then all you've done is just made yourself feel good and give someone a job, but they're not going to be successful. So this concept of diversity and equity came across, right? And then about 8 years ago, inclusion was added to it. So I would go to a training about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's really the most beautiful thing. I love this. So diversity, the D says, let's bring in folks from diverse backgrounds. E, give them equitable opportunities. But I is inclusion. How do we ensure that when we bring folks from diverse backgrounds into our company, we include them end to end in the culture of the business and they don't feel like outsiders? So what started 20 years ago about diversity, which was a lovely thing, just got better and better and better over time. So much so now, as I shared earlier, 90% of Fortune 500 companies have a DEI program, and a lot of them report to the CEO. So what I'm really excited about is, having watched this journey, I can't wait to see what happens for the next 20 years. I mean, what are going to be the next levers that really smart, caring, loving DEI people and folk and practitioners come up with to make it even stronger and better? It's really neat.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Adam, my final question for you this morning has to do with yourself and how you want your own personal and professional legacy to be determined.
How I want it to be determined would just be by living a life. When I was in college, I took this class called Theory of the Good Life. So as a senior, you take this class and think about what sort of person do you want to be. And I remember this concept of being self-actualized. And the concept of self-actualization is, you know, in the course of your life, really becoming that person that you were supposed to become, that you chose to become, right? And to actualize whatever that is for you, your greatest strengths, your greatest dreams, and really go after them to actualize your dreams and your existence. And so, you know, what I've chosen to do is follow this calling. You know, I was an executive for 20 years, and then I gave talks a lot around my company and around MBA programs about what it was like as an executive. I'm struggling with mental illness and what other organizations, what leaders can do to make a difference. And that just became a calling for me. And so, you know, I really, honestly, what I've done, your legacy is my children being good people and having lovely kids. Those are the legacy that I am most interested in. The other stuff is just everything about mental health is just a calling that I don't care if anybody ever knows my name. I need no legacy. I don't care if anyone ever knows who I am. I just know that my dad died of suicide because of stigma. My mom died of stigma. I spent 15, 17 years with undiagnosed mental illness because of stigma. And basically my calling became this: I'll be damned if I'm not going to do anything I can day to day to make other people not have to go through what I did, because it friggin' sucked. It was really, really hard. And so that's just, it's a calling. It's not, I don't think about the legacy. I think about what I'm trying to do, which is just bring mental health literacy to leaders so that we can change corporate organizations in the world.
Yeah, well, I have to tell you, Adam, your passion for the subject and your desire to make a difference is certainly admirable, my friend. And I want to thank you for joining me this morning to talk about the importance of mental health in the workplace. And I want to ask you finally, my friend, if people want to get connected with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Absolutely. Well, we are on all the social media handles of Simple Mental Health, or you can go to our website, which is simplementalhealth.com.
Fantastic. Well, as I said, I really want to thank you for opening up the avenues of conversation about mental health in the workplace, my friend. Your work in this space and time on my behalf this morning is most appreciated, and I want to thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm so grateful for the opportunity. Have a great afternoon, Kevin.